Hello, my name is Matt Leonard and welcome to FX PhD. We are in class number 8 and we are in Maya Fundamentals, mya222, and this is Look Dev and Development, continuing looking at our Digital Emily shot. So we're going to continue straight off where we left off last week. So let's just go ahead and grab that file. So I'm going to come in and I'm literally going to grab the end of lesson 7, which is where we finished last week, and you'll see that's going to come in, and that is our head with our subsurface scattering shader assigned, which is here. And I haven't made any changes. I haven't really done anything additional on this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to save this for this week, so we have a class to begin. And so I'm going to go to class 8 Maya, and I'm going to make a quick folder called scenes. There's not going to be a huge amount because it's going to be mainly a Maya file. And in here, I'm going to call it start here, so we'll know where we're going. Okay, so let us begin our look development on this shot. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to open up our hypershader. You can see here is our subsurface node and the shading group. So we're going to begin by loading in these shaders. So I'm going to come in to my wrists and I'm going to come to patterns, and you can see in here we have this one which is called texture. So this is what we're going to be using to bring in our texture maps for setting up this shader. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to load the diffuse here. And you can see we've got RenderMan textures, that's what we're looking for. So we'll bring that in and I can press S. And we want to make sure this is on RenderMan here. Now sometimes it's going to be a little bit temperamental. There we go, that's working. So we've got that working just fine. So we're just going to label this one up. So this will be diffuse. Let's now grab another one. Drop this down underneath. Now this one is going to be our displacement mask. So let's come in and call that displacement mask. Again, let's just have a look at this one. They don't always come up. That one has, which is great. Next up, make yet another one. It's always best to bring these in just at the beginning so you can kind of see what's going on. So then we've got our actual displacement itself. So we'll rename this displacement. Let's see what we get with that one. There's our nice displacement. Again, let's just grab another one of these. It's kind of annoying, it always puts it not quite where you want it. So this one is going to be the next one. So let's make sure we double click. And this one is going to be micro geometry. Let's just view it. And we're going to go with that is working even though it's not quite micro geo, and it's 16K or mega, it's 16, yeah, 16K, that's right. So next up, let's grab the next one and drop this one in. This one is going to be our scatter, and this is actually the subsurface scatter itself. There we go, that one's looking great. And then last but not least, the specular. So there's our specular one right there. So we're going to come in and grab our specular map and just view that, making sure we name it and making sure we view it accordingly. There it is. So let's begin to get these into place. So I'm going to push this up a little bit, give us a little bit more room. Pretty happy with all this. I'm also going to switch these on to be a little bit bigger. So if you remember, you've got this button here that toggles the icon switch size. So you can really kind of see how big things are going to be. So it just makes it a little bit easier to kind of see what's going on. So they're all looking great. I'm going to pull this all away a little bit just to give us some space. So the first thing we want to do is we want to deal with that diffuse information. And the diffuse information we're going to basically pump into our subsurface scatter. So here's our diffuse. Let's come and look at our subsurface. So we've got near, mid, and far color. And what we want to do is, if we come back and look at our example, so if you remember, we come across to our shading setup and we've got our additive here. It's a little bit off the page. So we've got our diffuse that is working with our subsurface, and they're basically being kind of added together. So single scatter and diffuse, and they're being combined, and then that's going into our subsurface here. So what we can do is we can take a node that will enable us to add those two together. So we could multiply them together. We could do various bits and pieces. So let's just take our diffuse for the time being, and we want to take the result RGB and we want to feed it into this node. But if we open it up, we can see that this can go directly into our near, mid, or far clipping color. So I'm going to put it into our near. And let's now view that. So we can click on here, and what we're going to now see is a representation of what that looks like. So you can see now it's beginning to build up. So what would be good is if we say multiply the diffuse by the scatter. So let's just come over here. So we've got our diffuse. Displacements, we're going to kind of move out the way because we're going to use those as an entirely separate thing. So we want to take our diffuse and multiply our scatter. So let's see what we've got that can help us do that. So let's go back to our Maya icons and let's look at mult. So we have this multiply divide. That looks ideal for what we want. So let's bring that over here. So we want to take our result RGB into, say, input 1. And let's take our scatter result RGB and put it into input 2. So you can see we've got this kind of thing going on. And let's view that now. And that's what we're getting. So at the moment this is doing a multiply, which is kind of what we want. We could also do a divide. We could do a power. But mult is perfect for what we need. So again, just to see what that looks like, that's great. So I'm now going to say, let's take that and take the output of that into our shader. Let's see what we get there. So let's just push this up a little bit. Let's just focus in on what we've got going on. So we can now see we're beginning to get something going on up here once this starts showing us what's happening. Okay, so we'll leave that to cook for a minute. It takes a little bit of time, screen capturing and everything. But that's beginning to give us something that we're looking for. So the next thing is that we may want to give ourselves the ability to tint this. So I'm going to come down to our render man, and let's just have a look at HS, or hue, saturation and value. So we've got this one. This will give us the ability to adjust it if we need to. So I'm going to bring this one in as well. I tend to add these can be really useful. So let's take our output here, let's put it into our import, and then this I'm going to put into our result. So we're basically feeding the divide, multiply, divide into this. You can see that's what we're getting. And what we're now able to do is we're actually able to adjust this to give ourselves some control. So if we want to increase or decrease the saturation, this is going to be really useful for building up those different layers of mid, far and near tint or output. So I'm going to go with this and I'm going to label this up. So this is Pixar HSV, and I'm going to say this is tint, and let's use this for the near to begin with. And this one, let's make sure that this is mult by, and it's actually multiply diffuse by scatter. So remember what that one's doing. Now, the next thing we want to do is we want to use our mid. Let's do our mid next. So again, we're going to do the same kind of thing. We're going to use our scatter and our diffuse, and we're going to bring those together. So I'm going to grab this to begin with, and we're going to make another one of those HSVs. And let's just take the output straight out of this, and we'll put this into our mid. And let's maybe move that one up a little bit. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to multiply the inverse of the scatter by the diffuse this time. Let's see what that gives us. So I'm going to come back up to here, and let's look for mult again, because it's always annoying that it just throws it somewhere out the way. So let's zoom in on this section. So we want to take the same nodes that we have used before. So I want my result here into my input A. Well, in fact, we're going to go the other way, aren't we? So we're going to do input 2 and the result here into input 1. But what we want to do with this one is we actually want to do an invert before we get there. So we're going to try that. So back to RenderMan. Let's see if they have an invert here. They do. That's exactly what we need. So let's just see where that is over here. So this invert, we're actually going to invert the multiply. So we're going to invert the scatter, which is this one. So we want to bring this one in here. So we're going to say this into here, and then this into where our scatter's going, which is our input 1. So you can see it's getting a little bit messy. Maybe pull this back a little bit. Get rid of those. Somewhere like that, perhaps. They really need to just get out of the way for a moment. So what have we actually got going on? So we've got our scatter. And what we're doing is we're doing an invert of that, which gives us this. And we can choose which channels we invert. That's then coming into our multiply divide. So that gives us that. So without the invert, we get that. With the invert, we get that. So we're getting a nice map. And then this output, we're going to bring into this input so that we can now use this if we wanted to do any kind of color correction again. And then this, as you can see, goes into, as we said, into our mid color. So let's just see what we're getting now. So let's view this. And again, let's just give this a moment to cook. Okay, so we're definitely beginning to get something now. It's not completely right. It's still going to take a little bit of time before we get this perfected. But let's now look at the final section on this one, which is obviously going to be our far distance. That's the one we haven't got. So this unit length, you remember, needs to be somewhere around 0.5. That's what we kind of worked out, I believe, what kind of looks nice. Doesn't show us too much at that point. Let's dial it back to that for the time being. And this makes a huge difference. If you can see 0.1, see how different the color appears in this section while we're messing around with this. So you definitely need to get this on your model in your actual lighting. So the minute we start adjusting this, different maps, we're going to get a completely different look. So we very much need to put this together in a way that kind of makes sense, and then really look at it with regards to kind of how the color is going to be based on the actual lighting situation that we've got in reality. So the next thing we want to do is we want to do our far. So we've done near, mid, and then we've got our far here. Now I'm going to do the same thing that we had before. I'm going to grab our HSV. I always like to use this really just as like a controller. That's all we're using it for. We may never come to use it. We may do. Let's see. And this needs to go. I was hoping I could move it while it was selected. This needs to go into our far. Now what we're going to do with this one is we're basically going to adjust this. So we're going to use a couple of things. We're going to use our depth map to kind of desaturate this a little bit, or even adjust the luminance. It's really different ways we could work with things. So we're going to take our inverse node here. There it is. And let's take the output of that. That can come in. And you can see we immediately begin to get a result there. So it's now beginning to look a little bit more skin-like. But we also want to take our depth map. So let's go and find that. And that's over here. So if we look at that, here's our depth map. So we're going to use that. So let's drag this one over. And what we're going to do with this is we're going to basically use that with this tint. So if we look at what we've got here, and this is coming off the invert. Now you can see I can adjust the luminance, saturation. But what I want to do is I want to take this depth map, and in fact, you know what, I'm going to just take this straight from here. So I'm going to grab this and take another spur from this one, and I'm going to go straight into here, which is going to give me, in fact this is the one I wanted, so straight into here. That's going to give me that, and then I'm going to use this depth map you can see here to basically adjust this. So I'm going to take another multiply divide, let's grab that, and I'm going to take this in as input 1, this in as input 2, and let's see what we get here. So now I'm going to get that. I'm then going to run this into here, and if we view that, we're going to obviously get this. And then I'm going to blend this after I've adjusted it slightly. So it's just going to bring this down a little bit, and then I'm going to blend this in. So let's go with a blend. So on here, we're going to take this out into A, and then this one, let's bring this down here. Let's take this into B. And then this is going to come to here. So this is going to give us the ability to blend between these. So if we just confirm what we've got going on, so that's that, and I can begin to blend this in. So I can now use this to kind of color correct what we've got going on here. Okay, so we can kind of decide how we want this to look. Maybe somewhere like that perhaps. So let's try and get this a little bit more organized. So we've got a ton of stuff here. Sometimes with these it's pretty difficult to try and get these all exactly right. Bring this up here. Got a lot of things going on. I'll bring that to here. That to here. We're going to get crossing the streams whatever we do. Maybe that there. What I like to try and do is keep all of these nodes roughly in line, so we kind of get a feel for kind of what level things are at. So we know that all of these mult and divides kind of sit together. And then we've got these that sit together. These are all our HSVs. And then we've got an extra one here. And then we've got this. And then we've got this. So let's see what we're getting now. Now we've kind of built all this. The next phase, once we get to see what this is going to look like, is really beginning to fine-tune how this is going to look. But before we do that, we're going to add in our displacement. So let's just have a look at where this is going to end up. Now at the moment, what we haven't done is we haven't really organized kind of how deep the length is going to be for this. So we know that as we adjust the length, we can increase or decrease kind of the brightness of this. You see, we can make a real difference in kind of how bright everything goes. And what we really need to do is we need to be able to see exactly kind of what this is looking like on the character. So we've got all this set. Let's rename this to Emily. Let's close this down. Let's save this out before we do any major rendering. So we just call this class 08 underscore 01. And let's have a look at what this is going to look like. You can see at the moment it's looking pretty good, but we're definitely missing some of the subsurface here. So I'm going to increase this backlight here. And I'm just going to do an IPR on this. And I'm going to do that while adjusting this. So if you remember from last time, we just pulled off our attribute editor. And let's just set the IPR. Bring this in again. And this is where we can now begin to play with this. So we can kind of begin to see, as we adjust this near and far weight, kind of the differences we're getting. So definitely lower numbers are causing the subsurface not to work quite so well. So let's increase this maybe somewhere like here. We can also play around with these near far weights as well. So this seems to be a little bit better high. And the far length is at 5. Let's just see what happens if we make that 10. A little bit more colour in once this goes up. So I think probably 6 might be a good number, somewhere around there. And our mid length as well. That feels better, a little bit lower. Okay, so you can really see we're beginning to get something that's beginning to work. Now, one of the things we're missing is obviously our displacement maps. So that's going to be the next thing we're going to look at. And again, we're really going to need to play with this. It's going to be kind of fine-tuning and just trying some different things. So at the moment we've got kind of too much going on here on the forehead. So we're going to want to come in and potentially adjust that down a little bit. Somewhere like so. We'll see how we get on with that. So let's just go ahead and stop that for a moment. And let's just open up this and let's just throw in the displacement. So if you remember, we have some extra things here. So we've got the displacement itself, which looks like that. We've then got the really fine displacement here, the 16K. Just really, really small. It's a huge file. Take a while to load in. And then we've got our specular as well. So the specular, let's get that in straight away because that needs to go in. So I'm going to bring that back here. And we can get this in by simply middle dragging it across. So we want to go with specular color, middle drag in, drop. That's going to load that in. We'll see that change. And then it's going to really be a question of kind of fine-tuning this. So the roughness definitely needs to be highish. Somewhere like that perhaps. And again, let's just make sure we've got that selected. Let's close this down, and with this selected, go back to the IPR. You can now see that specular information there. So you can see as we begin to adjust this, get more or less amount, and we really just want it very fine. We've got a lot of brightness here. This is due to that light. So let's just come in because it's super bright. 15 exposure is way too bright. Let's go with a 9 back onto here. Let's load it again. And just look at somewhere around there, beginning to look like it's working. Obviously it's going to depend on what kind of skin we're getting, but that's beginning to work. So again, let's just close that or stop that, minimize that. So it's returning to here. Final thing we've got is obviously our displacement here that we talked about earlier. So we've got our main displacement map, which is this one, just the kind of the center part. So I'm going to grab that. We'll just bring this over and middle drag that into our displacement there. Now if we come back to here, we've got our clear coat if we want to use that, which we don't. Specular, we're good. So we've got most of the things working here. This bump, we can actually feed into that, our really fine texture here. But what we're actually going to want to do is click and we'll choose File, and that's going to set up everything we want, and then we're just going to swap this out. So this bump 2 needs to go into here, and that's going to be our result here. So we've got result RGBA, doesn't really matter which one. I'm just going to go with our red channel, and then these can go in the bin. And then we've got the ability here to kind of adjust how much bump we actually want. So we're going to make this pretty low, 0.1 for the time being. It's probably going to need to change later. All this can move up right to the top. And again, I kind of want to keep this together somewhere like that. It's going to work. And then let's just make sure our displacement is definitely in. So then we just want to add our G into our displacement. So let's drag this down. Again, I'd be very tempted, although it seems a bit crazy, just to move that back to here and this kind of down. And for neatness, I may just shut this up somewhere like that. In fact, it seems to feel better open, just so it's not so messy. Okay, so we've made quite an elaborate tree. Let's come back and just see what we're going to get. So again, we're going to put on our main render after doing a quick save. And let's see what this ended up giving us. Okay, so this has been going for a while now, about 6 minutes. And it's probably getting pretty close to finishing. But you can see the result we're getting is looking really nice. It's definitely going to need some fine tuning. The spec isn't right. We're going to need to put a little bit more on the displacements and maybe the bump mapping. That's really just been thrown in and not really fine-tuned at all. But what we are getting is looking great. So I'm pretty pleased with this. I mean, we've managed to get this together in a couple of classes, and although it's not completely there by a long stretch, it's looking definitely in the ballpark. So I'm going to leave you with this to play with. As I said at the beginning of the class, we're never going to get it all the way to being completely photoreal, just because we just don't have the time. But I would very much like you to take this on and really work with it yourselves. Feel free either to use RenderMan, which hopefully you've got, or Mental Ray, and see how close you can get this to looking at what you would consider to be as photoreal as possible. Anything that you make, I'd love to see. Everyone else would love to see, no doubt, in the forums. So please post your images in the forums along with any other questions that you may have. So next week, we are going to be focusing on cameras and how they work inside of RenderMan and all the things we can do with those. So as I said, I'm going to leave you with this. Any questions, please put them in the forums. Your images from rendering, please put them in the forums. And until next week, as always, this has been Matt Leonard for FX PhD.